Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? It's your brother MH with another video in the car. It's been a long time since we've done one of these, but sometimes they can come out more natural anyway because it's less performative, you know. I can be a little bit more intimate with you and we can talk, me and you, on these very important issues that are on the news. And of course, what's been on the news is the death of Charlie Kirk, an individual who I've actually made a video about in the past and challenged to a debate and all these kind of things because he was a political adversary, especially vis-a-vis the issue relating to Gaza and the genocide. But the senseless murder of this man, probably by some crazed lunatic, far-left lunatic, has left a lot of people from both sides of the so-called political spectrum speaking in different ways. I mean, some people have become much more emboldened from the right wing, and some people have become the opposite from the left, and then you have Muslims saying whatever they're saying. I haven't really had the time to look at all the responses, but I wanted to approach this in a completely different way, and that is to tackle this notion, this false notion in my view, of freedom of speech and expression. Now, what do I mean it's a false notion? I think it's a phantom notion. I think it's a useful fiction. I think it's a Western mythology. The way it's being presented, the way it's used as a slogan, okay, I think it's actually a fiction. Let me explain why, right? When people come out and say we want freedom of speech and expression, what are they actually calling for? They're calling, and this is the only thing they can call for, the government to remove limitations on things like hate speech, on things like racism, or whatever it may be, that prevents or otherwise inhibits an individual from saying whatever they want to say, so long as they don't want to harm anyone else in the social liberal sense. And that's, of course, the harm principle. That's what they're calling for. But in so doing, they're assuming, actually, the presupposition is that freedom of speech and expression is the sole property, in a sense, or it's exercised only by the government. Freedom of speech and expression, and I don't want anyone in what I'm about to say to misinterpret what I'm going to say, because obviously I'm a Muslim guy. People are going to say this guy is saying this, that, and the other. Freedom of expression is not, something the government controls. Because the assumption here is that the government has all the power in a given society, where we know that actually there are different parties that have different power. There are different stakeholders of power. And when I was doing my undergraduate in politics, this is actually the first thing I learned. I've done an undergraduate, and I can remember the first year, and I think it was the first lesson, where they taught us what is referred to as theories of power. And I remember Robert Dahl, his definition is, the power is person A's ability to get person B to do what person B would otherwise not do. And then they contrasted this with Backrats and Barretts and other individuals who actually said, no, power is more distributed. And most analysts said, actually, this is a more proper definition of what power is. Obviously, Michael Foucault took it to another level, but we're not going there now. In terms of power, it's more distributed, etc. And I think there is an element of truth in that proposition, that actually power is more distributed in society. Now, why am I mentioning this and linking it to the fact that freedom of speech and expression is in fact, a phantom and fictionalized concept that the white man of the West has made almost a religious concept, is because, look, power in any given society is in the hands of the government, yes, but also in the hands of multinationals, or of the hands of bankers, in the hands of the gangsters. You don't want to admit this, especially in a place like America, especially where you're saying you can have gun rights and stuff, and actually Kirk was one of those people. There is a clip of him saying something to the effect of, and I'm not going to play it because people are going to misinterpret, that if people have to die for this, it's fine, so, which is quite ironic, actually, considering that he died for it himself. Having said that now, if power is distributed in that way that we've just discussed, then freedom of speech is not a concept that can be actualized or realized or materialized in any meaningful sense in society. Because there will always be a group of people who decide not to obey the law. That their rational analysis, their cost-benefit analysis is that actually I'm going to go against the law, and in order to delete the influence, let's say, of my political adversary, we're not going to play by the rules of the social contract, and we're going to a more anarchical position, okay? There's always going to be a group of people that consider that to be a favorable option for them and or their cause. And therefore, freedom of speech, if you have societies with, especially if you have societies with mega populations like America, is something which actually cannot be realized in the full sense. Now, having known this point, and it's very important that you understand that the reason why this is the case is because the government does not control, is not the sole administrator or the sole arbiter of freedom of speech in the society. If you understand this, and it's actually multiple sources and actually it comes from different stakeholders and whatever, if you understand this point, then you realize that sloganeering on behalf of freedom of speech, now we need freedom of speech and this and that and the other, is almost a fruitless exercise. Because you're asking the government to do something which is not in their power. This guy, Charlie Kirk, was connected to Donald Trump. He was basically, with all due respect, his mascot. Every day he was speaking about him. Every day he was like, I'd see a tweet that he was saying things about this and that and the other. He was a close friend of Donald Trump. Yet Donald Trump, who had recently been attempted assassination has been attempted on him, Donald Trump himself, couldn't protect him. Despite the fact that he was in an environment that was similar to the one that Donald Trump was in before he got shot. But Donald Trump didn't take the precaution and say, okay, this guy's a firm supporter of me, therefore someone who would want to kill me would also want to kill him, because he's a very influential person. He mentioned it himself, very influential to the youth and so on. And if they hate me, then they hate him. The security was abysmal. He was, with all due respect, America really has to reassess how they're dealing with guns here. Like, you've got 330 million people in the country, or maybe more now. I don't know. I haven't looked at the population. And we're hearing it's an unsafe. I wouldn't want to live in America. I'm sorry to say. It's an unsafe country, especially not as an influencer. Especially not as an influencer that discusses politics and religion. America becomes one of the most unsafe countries that you can imagine because you don't know who's carrying a gun. It's too much. So that's another issue. Donald Trump really should have protected his man a lot more than that. He should be blamed by the far right. He should be blamed because there was an attempted assassination on him, and he didn't even put the precautions in place for his major, supporters and so on and so forth. But that's something else. What I'm saying to you is the following, is that if we as a society know, or as people know, that freedom of speech is a phantom and fictionalized, romanticized, idealized concept. It's a religious concept, really, because it's connected to classical liberalism in one way or another. And that mentioning it so much in slogan is actually a fruitless enterprise because there's so many different stakeholders of it and all the things that we just mentioned. If you know that, then what is it then? You should know that there is a limit to what you can and can't say or should and shouldn't say in terms of self-censorship. There should be a limit to that. Because if you know that, if I say this about this group of people, I'm putting myself in danger. This is an advice to myself. Like me, by going out and speaking about Islam and the Gazan genocide and the Rohingya genocide and the Uyghur genocide, there are so many enemies to me, right? I understand that carries a risk. But especially when you talk about politics and religion, you understand that carries a risk. From our perspective as Muslims, we have this concept of martyrdom, which people, once again, they distort this concept, which is that if you die in this context, like someone shoots you or something, then you're a martyr. You actually are a martyr. The Prophet ﷺ said it himself that whoever dies protecting his wealth or self or his family, etc., he's a shaheed, he's a martyr. And so this idea for us is, that's what gives me comfort. Okay, that somewhat, if I go out like that, it's fine, no problem. I mean, I get to the highest level of religious, ranking. Okay, but what I'm trying to say to you is that there is a heavy taxation for all of us, influencers across the world, wherever your politics is and whatever your religion is. Yeah, there's a heavy taxation for taking and agitating to a certain level. There's a heavy taxation. If I go far enough, there's going to be people who want me dead. There are things I could say online that would make people want to shoot me and stab me. I've probably said those things already. But that's why, do not hide behind this idea of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, in your understanding, cannot, it's not just that it does not, it cannot exist. Because there's always going to be a group of people who are criminal and who would like to take the law in their own hands, and their cost-benefit analysis is always going to be that it's favorable for them to do so. And so what this thing about Charlie Kirk's murder has shown us is that even if you are connected to the political administration, the political elite, to Donald Trump, to the establishment, you cannot be safe. You cannot be, there is no safety. Okay, there's no safety. And if we know that, then at least what we should do is we can offer our disagreements with people that are political and religious adversaries or whatever it may be. But there has to be, we have to temper, or we have to be a bit careful not to go too far and not to create societal division. Because this will be one of many murders, by the way, if we continue, if the far right growth continues, because the far right is inviting the far left now to respond. And it's going to become, it could even become a civil war in your country if it continues in the United States, for example. If this continues for many, many, many years, it could actually become somewhat of a mini civil war. The only way to stop that is to realize, okay, well, actually, we need to all respect one another. Don't go too far. The far right can't come out and speak the way that they're speaking against ethnics and against racial minorities and against religious minorities and Muslims, because eventually this is going to be very bad for everyone. Okay, the far left can't respond in that way as well. If this continues, it's going to be very bad for everyone. That's the lesson to learn from this. And another lesson is, if you want to speak about politics and religion, then know that this is the ultimate price that any of us can face at any time, and there is no protection from it with Allah's will. But as Muslims, the greatest protection is the idea of martyrdom itself, and that, to be honest, is a beautiful thing. Wassalamu alaikum, and I hope you understand that I'm not advocating for anything particularly. I know people are going to be taking this out, but I don't care anyway. I've said what I've said. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.